this evening we're going to be talking to you about our back to basics and how long online royalties work. So this will take it down to sort of a real simple level, which will hopefully help everybody understand right from the very beginning how we collect music usage, how we license, and how we pay royalties for online. Before we actually get into that, I just do need to do a few sort of housekeeping things. So toilets for men and ladies is through this door, second door on the left, the gents is the first door on the right, the ladies is the second door on the right. If you do get lost, someone will help you, I'm sure. And the fire exits, if you see the green sign at the top on the ceiling there by the King's Cross Cafe sign, just follow that. We're not expecting any fire alarms this evening, so if you do hear the fire alarm, make your way out through that exit. We've also got networking drinks later on for an hour, so that'll give you the opportunity to talk to each other and share experiences, and we'll also have some staff members as well that are available to answer any specific questions you may have. During the evening, we will be sort of keeping it at a general level for everybody's benefit, but specific questions we will and can deal with later. And finally, you'll see the survey on your seat to help us shape these events as we go sort of further in the future. It's really helpful if you can tell us what you found useful, what you think hasn't been so useful, so that we can change the events over the course of the next few months and few years. So without further ado, my name's Julie Baskett. I'm the Head of Member Services. You can see we've got some beautiful people on the stage this evening. I'm just going to ask them to introduce you, guys and gals. Can you give a brief introduction?
Hello everyone, my name's Tim Arbour. I work here at PRS for Music and I'm the Head of Membership Support.
And my name is Graham Edwards. I'm a Head of Rights Holder Relations at iServices.
And I'm Ella Kirby. I'm Head of Digital Video at iServices.
I'm Nick Edwards and I'm Head of Online at PRS for Music.
And while some of those titles may mean nothing to you, all will become clear, I'm sure, as the evening wears on. So you will also have an opportunity to ask questions. I guess we have a period of time at the end where you can ask questions, but if you've got a burning question and it's relative to what's being discussed at that time, then if you want to stick your hand in the air. But preferable if we can keep the questions at the end so that we can get through what we've got lined up for you this evening. Also, we ask you to submit some questions before the event. We'll do our best to answer most of those. But again, if we don't manage to capture your question, then there will be people available at the end you can ask. Okay? So, without further ado, first question. Tim, can you tell us what classes as an online royalty?
Okay, so this would be any of the money that we collect and distribute from the various digital services out there who make use of our members' music, and that could cover audio services, and some examples might be, say, Spotify or some of Apple's services, or also it could be audiovisual services where our music is used. So, for example, it might be a service like a Netflix, or perhaps even a digital service that's provided by a broadcaster like iPlayer for the BBC.
Okay. Next question then. Can you tell us, how do we track online royalties and how do we know when the music is being used?
Okay, so I mean, the first step in that, which I won't go into too much details, of course, we have to know that the services are out there and we have to make sure that we're able to secure a license, and we're constantly monitoring the market to make sure that we know what new services are launching, what they're doing, and so we can get in there and make sure that we secure a license. And once we've agreed a fee with a service, an important part of our agreement will be making sure that we secure the necessary data and information from them to tell us what music is being used, so that we can then take that data in, process it, and turn that into royalties that we pay out to our members.
Okay, I know we're going to cover that in a little bit more detail later on, but at a high level that gives us a good idea of how we do that. How can members in the room ensure that they get paid? What do they need to do?
Okay, well, again, I guess we'll go into this in So maybe some more detail later, but just as a general point, and something the members can really do to help us is when data comes in from a service, one of the key processes we have to do is we have to match it. We have to say which of the works registered on our database are they telling us about? Because we have to do that in order to get the money out to you. We have to know it was your work. And there are things you can do to help make that process easier and ensure we can pay you. And a big part of that is making sure that your works are registered in a timely fashion, well in advance of when they become available online. But also the way in which you register those works, you can ensure that the way that when you're titling them, when you register them, that the titles are correct and match the way that you would expect them to come in from the services. If you have alternative titles, if there could be different versions, there's opportunity for you to supply those, please do. But also if you have any of the metadata, if you know, for example, the ISRC code, so the unique recording code, you can also supply those to us, and that can be really useful when we come to try and match your works. Some of you might also be distributing your own works, maybe through distributors, in which case you may well have direct control over what metadata, what information about the recordings goes to the services. The more you can put in at that process at the start, the easier it will be for us to match your works and get you paid. So that's definitely something that all of our members can do to help make sure they get paid for their online usages.
Does everyone have an online account through the website? Just put your hands in the air if you do. Okay. For those that don't, I guess that's the first thing to do, really. And you can go through the website, and it will guide you through, creating an online account where you can then go and register your works. Because without that, you won't get paid. It's probably the first thing to take away from this evening if you haven't got an online account. And if you have got an online account and you haven't registered your works, please do that too. Without those things, you're just not going to get paid. There will be points throughout the evening which I'll probably say, make sure you take that away, because it's just key references for when you leave this evening. So, Nick, then, can you tell us which online licenses do we actually license?
Thousands between ICE and PRS.
Perhaps don't give us all 1,000 names.
No, I'm not going to list them off name by name. But from PRS's point of view, it's well over 1,500 each year. And it's easy to think of online as just relating to pure music service, but actually it's much broader than that. So it's really anywhere that content is made available digitally. So music streaming services, music download services, film and TV subscription services, and a la carte rentals, social networking, user-generated content, gaming platforms and apps, ringtones, ringbacks, podcasts, online karaoke, you name it. It's an absolutely massive spectrum. In terms of value, the license values range from, well, the starting point is £130 a year under our limited online music license, but obviously key licensees bring in tens of millions of pounds a year. The key revenue comes through from services that you'll know and you'll use, like Apple, Google, Netflix, Spotify, Amazon, and so on. But I think the key point to make is that this is an absolutely massively changing market. I've been licensing online services for 10 years now at PRS, and in that fairly short time frame, I've seen sort of 3 key revenue streams come and go. So when I started, the core revenue driver was ringtones. Broadband penetration was only just starting to come in. iTunes had only really just launched. So we've gone from key revenue streams being ringtones to music downloading to music streaming, and then all the supplementary services. So it's a real opportunity area for us as traditional physical moves to digital. It's much broader than just the music side of things. It's the film and TV, it's the gaming side of things that we're also licensing. So it's a broad spectrum. Yeah.
Okay. And when you introduce yourselves, there's some reference there to ICE. Who is ICE?
I better take that one.
Graham.
I better take that one. It's a good question. You might well have heard of ICE before. You might not have done. So I'll give a very basic summary, and you can either stop me halfway or ask at the end or see me personally afterwards. I don't want to go into too much detail about it. The historic ICE you might have heard of before. For those that have, you might be well aware that it's a collaboration between PRS and STIM, the Swedish Collection Society, on a copyright database. And the copyright database that PRS and STIM have used. ICE Services is a bit of an extension on that. It's also inviting Gamer, the German Collection Society, into the collaboration for the sole purpose of processing online royalties and doing online licensing, which is what we're talking about tonight. So ICE is an entity that's owned by PRS, Gamer and STIM, where they outsource a lot of the multi-territory online licensing and processing too. So we're kind of specialists in that field.
Gamer and STIM. Who are they?
Yes, it's a very good question. So Gamer is the German Collection Society, equivalent of PRS, and STIM is the Swedish Collection Society, equivalent of PRS. Now, I have a slide here, if it works. Now, it looks like it was put together by an 8-year-old, purely for, I didn't want it to be too complicated. And actually, my PowerPoint skills are not much better than an 8-year-old anyway. But to give some sense of roughly who we are and what we do and what services we provide, as a very vague summary, I mentioned earlier the copyright service that I mentioned, purely a copyright database. But there are other services that are required. So starting from the top, it says core licensing and rights holder services. So we have customers at ICE. There are kind of two types of customer. The customers I'm in charge of are PRS and STIM and Gamer, because they've given us their business in this area. So they're my customers, and I try and get other societies to come on and do the same thing. Our other customers are licensees, so DSPs, the Spotifys, the YouTubes, the Apples. We negotiate with those to try and get licenses in place for the use of the repertoire. This stuff here, I'm going to stand up for this bit. This stuff here and this stuff down here is all the stuff that we need to do all the processing. So you've got a database of songs. Spotify might send a whole lot of usage about this is the amount of songs that people have streamed in this month in this territory. And we have to match that against this copyright database to then produce an invoice and go, right, this is what you've used, we've matched it to our database, we represent this repertoire in this territory, here is your invoice. So things like invoicing and finance and legal services and business intelligence, all that, we have a layer of business that does that. And then on the licensing side, so there are, I don't want to go into too much detail on it because it's probably not necessary at this stage, and you can ask me about it if need be, but generally our customers are PRS, Gamer and STIM at the moment, and all DSPs that might require a license. There are one other set of customers, I should point out, whereby there are some major rights holders that go, do you know what, we don't mind dealing with the Spotifys ourselves, we think we can go and get a license, but what we still need, even though we can do this bit, what we still need is all this bit. So we have other customers that just take these two bottom levels of service, and there needs to be a clear distinction to make sure we don't get involved in any of their licensing.
And why create ICE in the first place? What was the purpose of that?
The main driver behind it really is when you think about the amount of data that is involved nowadays in licensing. You know, 20, 30 years ago, the amount of data that collection societies were processing revolved around record companies and the like. Then it moved on maybe to downloads. You get into the world of streaming and it's billions of lines of data. So we processed 2.8 billion lines of usage for January usage alone this year. It's an amazing amount. So every collection society was facing that problem. We have all this data to process and we need better and more efficient systems to cope with it all. So it's just inadvisable for every single society to build their own system to do it all. There needs to be a sort of collaboration to make sure the rights owners aren't affected and isn't costing too much to the rights holder. So there's a need to collaborate and share systems, share knowledge, and make it more efficient. So the service it really provides is trying to decrease the cost of doing all this processing. So it isn't every individual collection society doing it. Let's collaborate, build one system to do it all.
So it makes it cheaper for the members in the end, in the long run,
That's
I guess,
the long
in the
run.
future.
That's the aim, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Cool. Okay, so you're from ICE. Nick, you work for PRS. You both do online. Why is there a difference?
Shall I try and...
You go first.
In the most simple terms, in terms of how we license different entities, ICE primarily license music services that are available across Europe and beyond, so it's not just limited to Europe, but only for certain sets of repertoire, so it's not blanket licensing, whereas what I do in PRS is full blanket licensing, but only for the UK, or usually only for the UK. There are exceptions, where we represent our entire membership, so including major publishers, everyone's in, and it's an old-style blanket license solution. I suppose the core difference is how we calculate royalties. If a download store sells 100 downloads, PRS will bill them on the basis of 100 sales because we represent everyone. What ICE are doing is having to take the data, analyse who's written the tracks in those 100 downloads and make a repertoire-based, share-based claim on every single track. So it's transactional processing versus blanket licensing. Both work for different sets of services, and we've got a fairly comfortable split with how we approach the market. So everything film and TV, even if it's Apple's service, we'll license them on a blanket basis for the UK, whereas ICE will license their music service on a multi-territory, pan-European, repertoire-specific basis. Does that make any sense at all?
So is it the difference between UK only, in the main, as you said, versus multi-territory?
Yeah, more or less,
Broadly.
but also the approach we take and the breadth of repertoire that we're able to license under particular deals.
Yeah,
Do you wanna add
so
anything?
for the multi-territory licenses, which tend to be Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, the bigger services, ICE are licensing those and representing what we call our core rights, which are the rights of PRS, Gamer and STIM directly licensed members, whereas those that are published by entities like Warner Chappell might have the commercial terms for those licenses negotiated by not myself at ICE, but somebody at Warner Chappell. But both ICE and PRS have an important part to play in the process of distributing those royalties onwards.
The deals that I do, I'll negotiate on behalf of our entire membership, including Warner Chappell. So we'll specifically flow rights into UK deals from the major publishers.
And now is probably a good juncture to mention that for that reason, I'm in competition with the likes of Warner Chappell, and it means that whereas Nick has some published rates that he can talk about, I can't talk about commercial terms and the detail of exactly what's included in the ICE licenses because my competition can't find out about that. So, sorry if some of my answers in this are a little bit broad.
Okay. I'm sure there's good reasons for that.
There are. It's the competition clearance reasons.
Okay. So any difficult questions around rates for Ella, you're probably not going to get the answer you're looking for. However, head for Nick if you want to know something about the stuff that you license. Okay? Everyone with us so far? All making sense? Yeah? Good? Okay. So if I've got a query about online, given the ICE, given PRS, who do I contact if I've got a query about an online usage, if I'm a member of PRS?
Do you want me to take, I can take this, shall I? You guys are members of PRS, so your contact point in any event will be your normal PRS person. So in terms of if there's a query that relates to something that ICE have done, PRS will take that query in and then contact us if they need to. It's kind of worth bearing in mind that PRS, even though they've outsourced this area to ICE, there's a lot of work that PRS still do in the end-to-end process, whether it's copyright related or whether it's then distributing the money and the data to go with it to you guys. So they are still part of the process. It might be that a query you have actually relates to their part of the process anyway. Mm-hmm. So always best to start with PRS. They will then draw on our experience if need be.
So queries through member services. I don't know if any of you have used member services already, but you can raise a query through the website or through the email addresses online. But essentially come to member services first. We'll try and decipher what's just been said and put it in the right direction. Okay, so we're going to sort of delve into a little bit more detail now. And I guess it's worth giving you a bit of a background there for it to all make some sense of where we've been, where we've come from, where we are now, why you may hear references to ICE versus PRS, but they both do online. So I think hopefully that was useful to give that bit of context. So now we're going to dip into a bit of detail. So the next question then is, how do streaming royalties work? Who's going to take this one?
Do you want me to take this one, Graham? Yeah. So for them, I'll do the ICE version, and then you can jump in. So obviously we're constantly tracking the market, and we have data coming in for all of the major DSPs, and we use that data along with data that we obtain from external sources to constantly benchmark those deals. And when it comes to renewing those deals, we're diligent in how we assess that data to ensure that we're getting the best possible value for the use of the rights that we license, along with services that we track that we know and love. A big part of my role is tracking services that aren't yet licensed, and reaching out to those services and doing that part of business development of getting them on board, getting them to realise that they do need a license for the usage of that they're making of our member works. And that can be tracking those services across multiple different territories, and increasingly we're looking beyond Europe at opportunities in other markets that are doing exciting things with digital media and music, like Asia Pacific. But to give you a quick sense of, oops, hang on, fingernails are too long, there we go. Some of the services that we definitely have our eye on, I can't get this to work. No, there we go. So services that we have our eye on that you will be familiar with. ICE currently are targeting the Facebook group of properties, so Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. We're looking at Snapchat, Twitter. Nick is looking at Twitch and increasing use of music on gaming platforms. We're also looking at services like Musical.ly, where we see quite different music usage taking place in different consumer demographics, and some oldies but some goodies that are still somewhat resilient to licensing, like Dailymotion and Vimeo, and services such as Bandcamp as well. In terms of how we segment that market in ICE, we look at scale, reach, and potential net value for our customers, the strategic value of the license, and expansion markets as well. And we just see a real blend of usage going on across all of the newer services at the moment. So blends of audio only, music and general entertainments, social usage, which could be anything from usage on Facebook to sharing a story on Instagram, as well as significant increases in user-generated content. So we're constantly tracking the market, and the life cycle of a new license can really vary between identifying a lead and actually getting a deal closed. A good example would be the license with SoundCloud, whereby they were obviously a target that was on the radar of the whole industry for some time, but agreeing terms did take a significant amount of effort from across PRS and a significant number of years. So that's how the licensing pipeline works. And from there, we once we have a partner on the hook, so to speak, we are constantly engaging with our approval committees. So we don't just do the deals and hope for the best. We're not allowed to do that, and there's many good reasons why. We put all of our significant agreements at ICE, and I'm sure it's the same for you at PRS, Nick, through a rigorous approval process comprised of committees made up of publishers, writer members, and ICE senior management teams. And those groups are constantly apprised of progress with certain partners and negotiations, and they see and approve the detail of all of those agreements. And of course, where the detail isn't acceptable and doesn't meet with their approval, they are part of the group that decides what action should be taken next. But we hope that doesn't happen. We hope we do have a license in place. And when we do, part of the terms with that entity are to provide us with usage data. So usually a period after a particular usage period, so let's say if it was Q1 2017, we'd probably start receiving usage data 60 days after that period from a partner, And ICE's function is to take that data in and process it. And do you want to ask me what I mean by processing? It would be that
You read my mind.
I did. ICE seeks to match the usage of member works within that usage data. And it then uses that information and applies the commercial terms to that data to output a sum of money that is distributable or pass-onable to PRS and distributable to members. Was everyone with me on that? It's quite a lot of words.
Okay.
It might be worth adding at that point as well, because you think of streaming and you automatically think how complicated it is, and it is, and the processing it is, and we've seen the volumes in the process. But if you just want to get your heads around it a little bit, it's just easy to think, well, if you look at any sort of licensing right across PRS, historically and ICE, there's always been a company that wants to use music, and to use music they need a license, so we negotiate a license. Once we negotiated a license, they then usually send us usage, we invoice for that usage, they give us the money for that usage, we pay it out to the members, and that principle still applies. It's more complicated on
I was going to say,
streaming
if only
side.
it was that simple, Graham.
Absolutely, yeah,
Be
absolutely.
great.
But you shouldn't really go thinking that streaming is this mad thing that's totally different from everything else, because in general, you are dealing with companies that want to use music. You're negotiating with them, you're getting the money off them, you're getting the data off them, paying you the money.
Hence, just coming back to the registering your works, coming back to the point that Ella just made, if your works aren't registered, when we come to match the data, there's nothing to match it to, we don't pay.
Well, I suppose it's more different in that typically we publish a tariff. We don't actually have one for streaming services. More often than not, because the vast majority of UK-only services are still licensed entirely by PRS, are pretty small and licensed under one of our limited online music licenses, which cover services generating up to £200,000 a year, and they're fixed fee, lump sum licenses. Sometimes you buy online and pay online if it's really small.
Got an example that could bring that to life?
Oh, some rough trade, for example, or small karaoke services. You know, they're not necessarily geo-blocking, but they're only really primarily available in the UK. So they're not a kind of multi-territory entity like someone like Spotify, for example.
Understand.
Normally we have a published tariff. So we have a published tariff for download stores, 8% of revenue, a range of minimum rates starting at 5p per download, because we don't license that many streaming services, and those that we do tend to be dealt with on a bespoke basis. We don't have a published tariff anymore, so it's difficult to kind of give you a flavour of the kind of rates that we'd be aiming for without
There is the minimum, you said.
Yeah, well, we have the concept of minimum rates or minima flows through all our licenses, so they kick in. So typically a license will be structured on the basis of a revenue share, so a certain fixed percentage of revenue depending on the type of exploitation, supported by minimum rates, and those minima may be subscriber minima if it's a subscription service, per download minima, per stream minima, so they could vary from 70, 80, 90p, a pound for a full-on subscription service to fractions of a penny for a streaming-based service that's not a sort of a paid-for service. But the important point is that every deal we do usually has minimum rates or a royalty structure supported by minimum rates. So if a service wants to become a loss leader, wants to discount prices, it wants to offer extended free trials, something like that, then we still ensure royalties flow through to members. And in the case of some streaming services, those minimum become kind of de facto royalties in their own right because they never necessarily generate much in the way of revenue. But like ICE, our deals for streaming services, for music streaming services, tend to be fairly bespoke, so we can't talk about the commercial side of things, sorry.
Well, the principles are the same for ICE as well in terms of how we construct our terms. So we're kind of reasonably similar in that regard.
Okay, good, thank you. I guess the one that we're all familiar with and that everybody generally talks about is YouTube. Can we say anything about how YouTube royalties work?
We can. As I've said before, I can't go into
Any
the
different?
detail on the actual terms, but in principle, the way the royalties work for YouTube is no different. YouTube is an example of a multi-territory license, and it's one that we license across markets wider than just Europe. ICE performed the same task essentially of isolating an amount of revenue that will be coming in from YouTube, and across the usage reports that we receive from YouTube, we aim to identify, to match as many works in those usage files as we can. There is a distinction with YouTube though at this point, in that some of the usage files that come through from YouTube aren't as clean as we might see from other services. That's because they do offer a vast amount of user-generated content on their service, as well as officially provided premium content from major and independent record labels and distributors. So some of the data we have to match with is good, and some of it that we have to match with is less good. But from that, we then seek to identify as many works as we can. I think something to bear in mind with YouTube is that when we're looking at the front end of YouTube, and you see that player on the desktop version or on your mobile phone, which says 1 million streams or 2 million streams, those streams would have been garnered sometimes over time, and sometimes that time was the past 24 hours. Have I got feedback?
It's probably me because I've moved. Sorry.
Sometimes the streams would have been generated really recently, and other times the streams on that video might have been generated over 10 years. We receive reporting from YouTube on a regular basis, and it might be the case that even when a work or a video has what looks like a significant number of streams, that what we're receiving in the reports currently isn't quite as high. And certainly we don't cover, if you saw 1 million streams on YouTube, we don't cover all of those markets, and those streams are going to include streams taking place in North America as well, which we don't cover. So it's not that I'm saying all is not as it seems, but there are, from the numbers that we see on the screen, we do receive quite different data. But principally then from that point, we identify what we can, and we pass that data back through to PRS. Tim, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about what happens next in terms of PRS's distribution policy on that.
It's really quite straightforward for us. I mean, again, it's the same on YouTube as it is for other streaming services. We'll receive a set of data to be paid. It will identify works, and it will identify the relative volume of streams against each of those works, and we'll also have a set of royalties available to be paid out for that period, typically a quarter, and we'll simply apportion the money over the total streams that have been reported and make a distribution on that basis. So there's no weighting or valuation in there other than how popular was the work that was used in that period relative to those other works.
Okay.
And that's the same for YouTube and other streaming services.
Makes sense, yeah. Sorry, you got a question? Do you want, we've got a microphone actually, so. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just trying to trace how this streams from around the world comes back to England. You mentioned North America, you don't get the reports from North America. Where do the North American reports go to, and do they ever filter back to the PRS?
PRS, well, I'm not sure if I'm best to take this, but PRS has a series of reciprocal agreements around the world for the licensing of the PRS rights in other markets. So you're absolutely right. There is another flow of that data and of those monies which is slightly outside of what ICE is doing.
You're ICE, aren't you? You're not PRS. That's the difference.
We didn't really want to confuse everyone with that part, but you're absolutely right, and it's something that we wanted to come on to in a bit, was that there are monies coming in from international societies that come to PRS as well, for the markets that the licenses that I do don't reach out into.
Tim, have you got something to?
Yeah, I guess our historic and our usual position, like if you take PRS, is that all we license is what happens in the UK. And in fact, any use of your music that happened outside of the UK would be licensed in that let's say it was in France, would be licensed in France by the French society, and they would send us your money, and we would collect that and pay it out. What's kind of, I guess this is how it's changing, but what online has led the way in is that we actually go and license directly into those territories, or a number of those territories. So if your music's used in France online, we'll go and license it. That doesn't come via SACEM, who are the French society. North America is outside of the scope of that for now. So the licensing that ICE do on behalf of PRS doesn't reach as far as that. It covers many, many territories, Europe and beyond. And so you're absolutely right that in North America, if your music is used, there are a number of societies in North America, but most likely ASCAP would license with YouTube. They would identify the works, and they would send, if it's your work that I've identified, they'd send that money back to us, and you would get that as an international payment on your statement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Great.
And are you saying as long as you've got like the ISRWC code or whatever it's called, it should be able to trace straight back as long as you register properly with the PRS?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the work registration details that you provide to us, to an extent, some of those are made available for view internationally. So yeah, but there is never any harm in providing to us all of the available data that you have about your works. And if you're ever in a position to supply your work to services, there is never any harm in trying to provide all of the relevant metadata as well. It can only help both here and around the network internationally when people are trying to identify the usage of your music. And I mean, in online, more than any other space, it's absolutely key because the volume of data is so huge, you can't go fingertip and manually identify everything. We need to get this done automatically with computers linking up pieces of data.
What are the primary types of metadata you think are the most important then?
So the best thing for us is ideally codes. So I mean, it would be international standard work codes, ISWCs, or international standard recording codes, ISRCs, which, although they don't directly link to our works, we can work with them. Beyond that, the traditional things of supplying composer data, if there's ever an opportunity to do so. Obviously, artists can help, but we don't have artists. We have composers, we have publishers.
So, Ella, I think one of the questions is where performances are uploaded by others, are they remunerated from platforms such as YouTube?
As we mentioned earlier, there's lots of different deals in the marketplace for YouTube. But certainly at ICE and on behalf of PRS, we seek to license the broadest scope of rights and usages that possible and that the partner is making of our member works, whether that service is deriving value from those or not, and whether that service is seeking the rights from content uploaders for those, from premium services, from premium content owners, or from users. So that's our aim, is to license the broadest scope possible. And you'd have seen a lot of that to do with Safe Harbour and PRS's lobbying efforts. It's all to do with getting partners to to accept the liability for that content stream for users.
Always a challenge.
It's not an easy one.
And Nick, can I just ask, how are members paid for their music if it's used in TV and film? I guess particularly with the streaming services such as Netflix.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about the money inside of things. Tim might want to jump in terms of distribution side. General entertainment licensing is a broad spectrum of deals that we run, everything from catch-up television services to download-to-own of film and TV content. General rules are that it's UK blanket licensing, so we pull rights in from major publishers who have withdrawn their rights from the European Society Network. Standard approach of percentage of revenue supported by minimum rates apply. So we have a published tariff for a la carte rental and download to own. It's 2.5% of revenue supported by minimum rates. So 10p for a film download, 3p for a film stream, and then that money is spread amongst the writers who have written the score or the soundtrack for that film. And we haven't published a tariff for dealing with subscription services yet. We are licensing the likes of Amazon Prime and Netflix in the UK on a blanket basis. And they're all quite different, so it's not always beneficial to have a published approach when you then have to negotiate off tariff to deal with the particular requirements of some services and how they're made available. But usually it's UK-based blanket licensing, and it works really effectively and really efficiently. I mean, it takes us just 3 weeks from Netflix data arriving to distributions flowing through to members. So there's a big area where blanket licensing just works really slickly, really efficiently. What we're trying to do with some of these services that have launched on a worldwide basis is to see if PRS can partner with some other societies to offer simplified licensing arrangements where the local society that the service is launching that represents that territory either doesn't exist or isn't necessarily in a position to offer robust digital licenses. So when the major subscription streaming services launch around the world, how can PRS help to plug the gap where there isn't necessarily a society on the ground?
Yeah.
So that's what we're exploring. So not repertoire specific multi-territory licensing, but our own version of a multi-territory license to help rights flow more effectively through to members.
Okay. So we've covered quite a bit about the licensing side and how we gather data and so on and so forth, which it'd be good to move on to some of the distribution side of it now and what happens. So we've got the data, it's licensed. Tim, I'm looking at you. Can you just cover how do we agree the distribution rules?
So all of the distribution rules that we apply are fundamentally agreed by the board. Our board is made up of writer and publisher members of the society and is elected by the membership. There's a subgroup of that called our distribution committee who review and approve all of the rules that we apply in relation to how we make decisions about identifying and valuing your music and getting distributions out to you.
Okay. So it's a committee made up of members basically, and
Yeah.
they form part of that decision-making process.
It's made up of the writers and publishers who sit on our board, yeah.
Okay. And how do we differentiate between PRS and MCPS?
So wherever we license online, I guess to take it back a step, we are always issuing licenses jointly on behalf of both PRS, so for the performing rights, but also on behalf of MCPS and the mechanical rights that they have. Wherever something is used online, we see it as there is always exploitation of both. So the works have been communicated to the public, the performing rights been used, but also you've had to make copies of those works in order to either enable a stream or to create a brand new download on someone's hard drive. And so when we're making payment, we have to divide that money up to both societies. So what we do is where it's a download, 75% goes to MCPS. We're saying the copying is more heavily favoured there. You've created a whole new copy on someone's computer. Where it's streaming, the division is 50-50. There are elements of copying and also elements of streaming. We do also have a split for webcasting, which is probably not as major anymore. That's where you're getting, I guess, web radio, non-interactive online services, and that is 75% in favour of PRS. So it's kind of on a scale depending on how much copying versus how much of just the straight communication.
Okay. So that's the difference between PRS and MCPS, but how do you determine how much members get paid?
Okay, so a fundamental principle at PRS in our distribution policy is we say that music is music. We don't really have any kind of weightings around genre or type or age or instrumentation or any of the things that you sometimes see in other societies. So the value, if you take a streaming service, as I said before, the value that a work gets in any given period for a streaming service is just going to be related to the popularity of that work. How many streams did it get? If it was a downloading service, how many sales did it get? What value did it generate? So it really is a straight line between the usage, the popularity, and the amount of cash that comes out to the member for that work.
Makes sense. There's a question here about how we sort of distribute and collect around territories, but I think we've covered that one already through various answers that have already been given. And so you've talked about how we actually arrive at the royalty, but how often do we pay that?
So PRS's main distributions are quarterly, and we're always targeting the inclusion of online royalties in those main distributions. In terms of time from a play or a download to a distribution, that can vary. It can depend on the terms of the service on which it's been used, but typically you would expect the time from a usage to distribution to be about 6 months.
Okay. I'm not sure if we've answered this one already, Nick, and shout if we have. How do you ensure that we get the right value for our music?
Dealt
I've
with it,
answered
but I mean, look, two angles from our point of view. One is just having a really robust approval process. We don't make decisions in isolation. We either publish a tariff which has gone through a rigorous board approval process, or we negotiate bespoke licenses. All our deals, whether it's ICE or PRS, have a two-stage approval process. Actually, for PRS, it's almost three-stage because we aggregate rights from major publishers who pull their repertoire out of the society network. They're already commercially minded deals. We build on precedent. We typically do fairly short-term deals. A lot happens in 3 years in the online marketplace, so most of our deals are 2 or 3 year deals. So they're constantly evolving and they're constantly sort of keeping up with what's happening in the market. You know, we look at things like functionality driving value. So if a service starts to launch things like offline caching, for example, what's the impact on the deal and how does it drive the value that we push through?
Offline caching?
Oh, like if you've got a Spotify premium tariff, you can temporarily download it to your phone.
Gotcha.
So what's the impact in the royalties that we flow through to our members? What happens when Netflix launched caching and you can download some of their TV programs? Do we start to look at the way that the royalties are split between members? Do we start to look at the increase that we can bring to the next version of a license to reflect that? And then I suppose the key principles of licensing. So the fact that we've typically got minimum rates built into our deals, or we take advances up front to safeguard the royalties flowing through to our members. The fact that we look at revenue share, and we've got a really broad definition of gross revenue. So we capture any revenue that's associated with the service, including things like advertising revenue. That all potentially flows through. And then, having a really strong definition of who we license and how we license and how we get the most transparency from the services that we're licensing. So it's always what we call the music service provider, or who is the consumer interacting with, who's best placed to give us all the relevant information that we need to collect to be able to process the royalties, who's got the best and complete, most transparent overview of how the money's being generated. And that's who we target and who we develop a relationship with. So it's quite different from the sort of traditional physical market where we used to license record companies. Now we license the digital stores, and we get complete and absolute transparent overview of all the money that they make.
Okay, thanks very much.
I'd add something to that.
Okay.
Which is that a service could be generating zero revenue. They could have launched, they could be a mass market service. They may have done that without a business model in place to monetize the use of member works. They could be IPOing based on that value.
IPOing?
Launching on the publicly traded market. And they could be generating value from the use of media and entertainments on their services. But nevertheless, even if a service isn't generating revenue, we still believe that they should be taking out a license immediately for the use of the works. That can take time, but the principle is that they should be paying no matter how much they generate.
Good, thank you very much.